thanks guys for coming today. Nice to see all of your faces. Been a long time since we had a physical event, so I think this is our first one so far. And thank you guys. Appreciate the time. I'm not going to do anything about the FD, so I think for the sake of time, I'm going to jump into the Veeam Exagrid story. So from Veeam, we've got Mark Govender. He's a senior system engineer. The other Veeam representatives here as well, it's Shane Regasegi and Ian Engelbrecht. So any questions you guys might have about Veeam, you can always ask the guys on the break. At Exagrid, we've got Randy Todd, who will present after Mark. Dave McMurdo, he's the country manager for Exagrid. So thanks guys for joining. So without further ado, I'm going to Mark. We go through the Veeam stuff, and then I'll hand it to Brady as well. Thanks guys.
Thanks, Winston. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks so much for joining us. So just to get things kicked off, we're going to have a look at Veeam and also maybe have a look at the integration between Veeam and Exagrid. If you guys have any questions, please shout. Ian's here, he'll answer all of them for me. So that's, anyway, let's get into it. So cloud data management. What is it about? The vision that Veeam kind of has for this is giving you the ability to actually move your data either within the different data center infrastructures, or whether it's at the edge, or even to different cloud platforms. So basically, that's a simple idea around it. However, if you look at the starting point of it, backup and recovery, this is almost, you kind of take it for granted. You need to back up and recover. But if you can't get that right, okay, it's actually going to be a challenge for you to start looking at how you actually work with cloud data management, okay? So very important, from a backup and cloud infrastructure portability, you've got your backup files, you've got a backup of your virtual machines, what do you do with it from there? So we give you the ability to actually do cloud mobility, move it from different data centers, whether it's a private cloud, whether it's a public cloud, monitoring and analytics, okay? You need to understand why the data is moving, where it's moving to, and when it actually needs to move as well. And then from an orchestration and automation point of view, you really don't want somebody sitting around watching when they actually need to move something somewhere, or maybe move it to a different cloud because of resources. So we need to actually look at building in some sort of orchestration or automation around that whole process. And then finally, governance and compliance. If you think about governance and compliance, it's actually very important these days, especially with ransomware attacks and cyber attacks. So you need to make sure that you understand where your data is actually located, who has access to it, and I think privacy these days is quite a big thing. So are you able to actually provide data back to the customers when they actually need it? And do you understand where their data is actually being kept? Okay. So from a cyber threat point of view, what is actually a cyber threat? So if you look at some of the actions that are actually carried out by cyber attackers, okay, it's things like data encryption, data deletion, data exfiltration, data injection, and device locking. So encryption, deletion, that's basically getting their hands on your data, encrypting it so that you can't actually access it, or even actually deleting your data as well. Data exfiltration is basically being able to get into your environment, remove the data from there, and actually hold it ransom, okay? So that's actually quite bad. Data injection is actually about changing the data that you actually have. So manipulating whatever data you have in the environment about customers' information. So it's something that you have to safeguard against. And of course, device locking. So if you look at some of the tools that they actually use to achieve this, it's things like phishing, malware, ransomware, and of course, denial of service. So if you think of it from a backup point of view, there's a lot of tools out there that you could actually use, to help you with the security of the environment. You could try maybe setting up firewalls, having antivirus software, but it doesn't mean that it's, they're never ever going to get in. So one of the last line of defenses is actually your backup files. Okay, so you need to make sure that you have complete backups, okay, and successful backups, as well as to make sure that you actually have measures in place to actually protect them. Okay, so you think about things like modifying or deleting backup files, okay? Is your backup files immutable? Is it encrypted? So can they read it? Would they be able to actually get access onto it? Can they get into your backup files and actually destroy it? So you can see how it links back to the actions that they actually take. So you need to make sure that you've got tools in place that can actually prevent your data from getting destroyed or deleted. So from a Veeam perspective, if we look at some of our cyber capabilities, okay? So our cyber capabilities is actually based on the NIST cyber framework, okay? NIST. That stands for National Institute of Technology. And our framework of capabilities is actually built around that. And that's actually having the ability to identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So for example, if you take something like protect, okay? Are you able to actually do a successful backup of the environment? Do you have a ability to actually test that your backup file does actually work? And also making sure that the data that you actually have is encrypted and protected from cyber attackers. So if you look at our Veeam platform, we have native Veeam solutions, okay? So whether you're looking to protect customers in the cloud, whether it's software as a service, even if it's applications like Kubernetes or a database like Oracle, whether you're protecting virtual environments or physical environments, or even unstructured data for that matter. We have native solutions that actually give you the capabilities to actually protect those environments. And the best part about this is that we can actually integrate it back into our Veeam backup and replication server. So you give the administrators and the users one environment or one console that they can actually work for and actually protecting a vast majority of their investment, okay? Then from a Veeam One perspective, we actually give you the monitoring and reporting around that environment, to make sure that if there's any alerts that come up, you can actually respond to those alerts. It gives the users the comfort that the data is actually getting backed up every day because they have the alerts to actually respond to that. And then we look at Veeam disaster recovery orchestration. This allows us to orchestrate and automate the failover of those backup files either into a DR scenario or even into a hyperscaler if we actually need to as well. So this is offerings that you can take out to your customers. And to top this, we have something called Veeam Service Provider Console. So this enables partners like yourself to actually be able to offer this as protection as a service. So you'd be able to use all of the Veeam native solutions built on modern data protection and actually provide that to your customers as a service. Okay. And of course, we have our security capabilities that will actually exist on each of those levels. So this is a bit of a recipe against cyber threats. I'm sure you guys have been working with backups for years, and one of the rules that comes up is your 3-to-1 rule, basically having 3 copies of your data on at least 2 different types of media and having one of those copies off-site, okay? So we extend that by actually adding another 1 and a 0. So the first one that we actually add on is giving you the ability to make sure that that second copy that you have off-site is actually immutable or possibly encrypted, and it can't be changed or deleted by any of the attackers. And of course, the 0. The 0 stands for no errors, okay? So this is about being able to actually test your backup and make sure that those backup files are usable, you are able to recover data from those backup files, and it hasn't been altered in any way. So we utilize Veeam data labs that will actually allow us to test those backup files and actually give you a full set, a full setup of protecting those backup files at different levels. So you can see you could do a 3-to-1 setup on-prem where you actually have 3 copies of the data on 2 different types of media, and at least one of them would actually be tested and immutable. We allow you to actually extend that out into a cloud infrastructure, and you'll be able to keep another copy of the data and also make sure that's immutable as well. Another thing to consider is the type of location that you're actually backing up to. Okay, so some of the ultra resilient backup locations that we actually see. You can see tape is still there. A lot of people mentioned that tape is dying off. It's probably still one of the #1 use cases for actually keeping data offline. Nobody can actually get to it. They'll have to physically get to it and damage it. So that's definitely an option. Or you could do offsite replication of a virtual machine and keep it at a different site. You can use our storage snapshot integration functions where we can actually orchestrate snapshots on your production storage unit. If you have a Veeam Cloud Connect infrastructure available, you'd actually be able to enable insider protection. So what happens with insider protection is, even though the backup files will get deleted from a Veeam backup and replication perspective, as maybe by a user that's not allowed to be doing that, the Veeam insider protection will actually have a copy kept at your Cloud Connect service provider. Okay, so this is an awesome offering for your customers. So if they do get hacked and the backup files are deleted, you can actually keep a copy that they wouldn't be able to see at all, and then when they do need it, you'd actually be able to provide it for them. Rotating hard drives, pretty straightforward. You're keeping your backup files offline, and of course immutable backups and a hardened repository. With the immutable backups, you can be reliant on the storage devices, and I mean one of the ones that we work very well with is Exagrid. So we'll actually look at what it looks like. So this is Veeam integration with Exagrid. Okay, so together with Exagrid, we've actually written a new Exagrid Veeam accelerated data mover, and that actually runs directly on the Exagrid appliance. Okay, so by actually doing that, we're able to actually ingest backup files 20% faster than a normal disk. Okay, so if you had to set up a normal SIFS repository on the Veeam backup and replication server, this sort of scenario will actually give you 30 times faster performance around that. Further to that, it actually allows us to perform synthetic fulls on the Exagrid appliance itself. So, if you're obviously going to have requirements for GFS, which is your grandfather, father, son setup of keeping backup files, you'd be able to actually process the synthetic full directly on the Exagrid appliance. And because of the way it works, it's actually able to do this 6 times faster than normal disk. Okay, so if you compare it to a normal SIFS repository or a SAN disk, we're able to actually do this a lot quicker. Another part is scaling out. Obviously, as your customers grow and as they need to keep all the store points, they get to keep a lot more backups. The Exagrid storage appliances has full support for the Veeam scale-out backup repository, okay? And it actually makes it quite simple to actually set up and also very simple to expand. So this makes it very easy for your backup administrators in that they actually have to deal with just one repository, okay? And they could actually possibly set up a couple of jobs or even one job and actually target the one repository. However, what happens when it gets full or it starts to get full? To increase it can actually be a pain. If it's a scale-out backup repository with an Exagrid appliance, you simply just add a new appliance in and your scale-out repository it increases in size and you'll be able to carry on with your backup jobs. Instant VM recovery. I think this has been one of our flagship features for years. So this gives us the ability to actually run a virtual machine directly from the backup file. So with the Exagrid, if you had to lose a virtual machine in your production environment, you'd be able to map the backup file using vPower technology directly back onto the hypervisor and actually get that virtual machine up and running in a couple of minutes. Now, because of the way the Exagrid is designed, and I'm sure Bradley will probably go through this later, it actually doesn't affect the performance a lot. So your virtual machine isn't impacted on the fact that it's running directly out of the backup file. And once it's in that state, then you have the ability to actually migrate it back into the production environment. So you can get your users up and running or get the services up and running very quickly using the instant VM recovery feature. The next feature that we integrate with is Show Backup and On-Demand Sandbox. Again, running from the compressed and dedupe backup file that's located on the Exagrid appliance, we're able to actually create an isolated network called a Veeam virtual lab, and that allows us to actually run virtual machines within those isolated networks. Now, your virtual lab can actually be set up directly onto your production virtual infrastructure, or you could actually have dedicated virtual infrastructure for it. However, because it's isolated, it has absolutely no impact to your production environment or onto the network. And then we actually start up those virtual machines. We do a verification job against them. So we first check if the virtual machine is up and running, do a bit of a heartbeat check on it. We'll check the operating system to make sure that we can actually maybe connect to it and so forth. And then we can actually do application testing within that virtual machine as well. And once that's completed, there's a report that's generated, and that will get emailed off to you to say that it was successful, or if there's any failures or warnings, that will actually be provided as well. In that state, you could actually leave it running, and then you can give an administrator or maybe a developer access directly into that isolated network, okay? And this would actually allow him to start doing testing on actual production data, okay? Because it's a complete backup of the original production. So when it comes to things like upgrades of software, any patch testing that actually needs to be done, they can actually utilize the sandbox environment to actually achieve that. And it's pretty straightforward. The nice thing is, even if you want to use it for training, okay? So if you need to maybe train some new users on the application, you'd be able to use the sandbox environment. If they break it, you don't have to care. Because the moment you shut down the shut down the isolated environment, all of the changes are removed and it goes back to being the original backup files, okay? So this is other features that also included. So like we said, using the Veeam data labs, we can do an on-demand sandbox whenever you need it. We can do show backup and show replica. So show backup is basically testing your backup files, to make sure that the data is usable, your virtual machines do boot up and so forth. If you have replication jobs going off-site into a DR environment, we're actually able to test the replicas that are sitting at the DR environment as well. Stage restore. Stage restore has a very unique, use case. For example, if you think recently about Poppy, okay, and about putting if somebody requests that their data be removed from your database, and for some reason you need to go back to your backup file, and obviously that backup file, because the data wasn't removed before, will have that person's details. How do you get it out of that database before you put it back into production? Okay, so that's where stage restore can actually help you. So we can actually boot up the machine in an isolated network. You'd be able to run a script or go through the process of removing that person's data, and then you'd actually be able to do a restore back into production with the correct data in place. The same with secure restore. A lot of times you might have had a cyber or ransomware attack, and you need to restore from your backup files. However, there is a chance that the ransomware might be in there. So with your latest updated virus definitions, you'd be able to actually scan that machine before you bring it into production. So that obviously means that you're not going to infect your network all over again. So just some new features that's actually come up recently. So I think it was towards the end of September that we've actually released version 11A of Veeam Backup and Replication with some new features. So the first one is GCP. So we've done an upgrade of our Veeam Backup for Google Cloud Platform. There's a lot of enhancements, including integration into the Veeam Backup and Replication server. We now have a bit of integration into the storage location for Kubernetes backup. So I'm sure everybody's aware that, probably this year, or was it last year, that Customs K10 was actually purchased by Veeam and is part of our group. So we're actually starting with the integration of that into the Veeam Backup and Replication. So if there's customers out there that are backing up containers, you're now able to leverage the storage repositories on your current VBR server as a backup location. We've introduced a public beta, fully supported with Red Hat virtualization. So if you've got customers out there with Red Hat virtualization and they want to back up those virtual machines, we're able to now do it with V11A. CDP, there's been improvements around the way it's actually designed, and so our initial synchronization is a lot better and a lot quicker, with not using so much of resources on the proxy servers as well as the memory usage as well. We've created a protection group catch-all environment for AIX machines. So when it comes to AIX and Solaris, you're able to actually have protection groups on Veeam backup and replication like we used to have for Windows and Linux, okay? So you're able to actually manage that from there as well. On the Windows side, with the release of Windows 10, I think it's called 20H2, H1, we have support for that as well as Windows Server 2022. And we've now introduced Nutanix Instant Recovery, so if you've got backups. So like we did previously with previous versions with the backup of VMware, we allowed you to actually take backups from physical servers or Hyper-V and do an instant recovery to VMware. Then I think in version 10, we actually introduced that same capability in Hyper-V. So we now actually have it for Nutanix. So if you pretty much have got any Veeam backup, whether it's a physical Windows server, whether it's a Hyper-V virtual machine or a VMware, you're able to actually perform an instant restore back into a Nutanix environment. A Nutanix environment that's using AHV. From a V1 perspective, we've added a lot more functionality and reporting into it. From a Google Cloud platform, we are able to actually produce reports and alerts on it. So any backups that's actually been done by Veeam Backup for Google Cloud, you'll be able to actually report and alert on it. On the hardened repository side, speaking about immutability, we actually have enabled some reports for it as well. So you're able to actually generate a report based on your immutable repository to see when your restore points will be expired out of the immutability. If there's any alerts or changes that was made by somebody, you would be flagged on that as well. The same with IBM AIX and Oracle Solaris. All of those backup jobs that are now managed by VBR, we're able to actually give you the reporting and alerting on that as well. We've improved on the amount of reports that you actually do get from a holistic point of view. So the enterprise reporting actually refers to that, where we actually give you generic reports that will actually cover the whole entire environment. So if you get a chance, it's a good idea to maybe get out there and actually try and play with that. The same with CDP, the way your CDP policies are actually behaving. If there's any alerting that's required from a proxy perspective or CDP proxy perspective, we'll be able to alert you on that as well. And that's it. I'm not sure if there's any questions from you guys. Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to Bradley.
Launched as a company 16 years ago now, out of Boston, or Massachusetts, should I rather say, where our head office is. And our relationship with Veeam is now about a decade already. That we've been working very tightly with them, or very closely with them. Cross-trained support organizations. We both have put a lot of focus on our customer satisfaction, right? So very high customer satisfaction scores on both sides of the companies. And I think it's just because of the close working relationship that we have with them and they with us. We work well together, the products work well together, and the organizations are well trained on both platforms. So we can help support our customers a little bit better. The one thing that you guys need to, or can you take advantage of quite a lot, is if you go onto our website, just have a squiz around there. We've maintained over 300 customer success stories that we try to keep up there. They will be across a range of industries, verticals, sizes, blah, blah, blah. But it's something important that you can use in front of your customers to be able to show the successes that both companies have had, to be able to switch customers from legacy platforms, if you want to call it that, right? So, I won't name names here, but the big thing that we also strive for is industry recognition awards. These are partners and customers that rate us as well. That was 2020, but we've already received 6 for 2021. And the big thing over here, Storage Product of the Year, Return on Investment Company of the Year, and then Immutable Storage Company of the Year. Now, immutability, you heard that word come up quite a lot. I'm going to throw this back at you. What is immutability?
Can't change it. Google says unable to be changed.
Yes. Very, very good. Was your phone listening while I was talking? So yeah, it cannot be changed, it cannot be modified, it cannot be updated. This is very important in the world of security events that we are having, right? I think not one of you don't know a customer that has had a security event, right? Whatever it is, might not have been ransomware, but it could have been something else. Ransomware is the big thing I think we've got clients. And that leads me to the requirements for backup storage, right? Backup storage, as much as we have a lot of vendors talking about backup storage all the time, especially deduplication as a technology, we as Exagrid are not a deduplication appliance. We use deduplication within our technology, but we are not a deduplication appliance. We are a tiered backup appliance. We do tiered storage within our appliance that utilizes deduplication for cost efficiency. Very different to doing deduplication. But if you look at those four, being able to meet your SLAs is extremely important. Your customers probably constantly complaining about not meeting SLAs, restore and backup SLAs. Being able to do scalability, so scale as their data needs change, and then being able to have ransomware recovery built in as well. So those are four very important topics to be able to gauge and engage with your customer about when you're chatting to them. So in the world, and I mean I'll throw this back at the Veeam guys, in the world of Veeam, there's one, they call it a performance tier and a capacity tier, right? In the performance tier, you have choices across this broad spectrum. You can use just regular disk, you can use a NAS device. It's one of the powers that Veeam has of a flexibility of choice, right? But each of those have deduplication appliances as well. But they each introduce pros and cons, right? And what we try to do with our technology, and I think we've accomplished it quite well, if you look at the successes we've had, is that we try to take those two worlds and we put them in one. So we make it a simple platform for the backup application to be able to talk to. All of this is invisible. None of this is something that the backup app has to think about. We take care of all of that. There's no having to set flags, having to make sure the backup jobs are set correctly. It is all integrated and invisible to the backup application itself. And these things are important topics to customers. Backup, be fast for backups and restores. Cost efficiency, making sure you get low disk usage. Scalability, to be able to make sure you can meet future needs, not only now, but be able to meet those needs in 5 years from now. So that's technologically, and then economically, we also had to change the way we do things. So from an economic perspective, there's a couple of promises that we make to our end users, our customers. One of them is giving customers price protection. So we call it scale on demand, almost, it's sort of like a scale on demand. Add what you need, but know that your cost is going to be predictable for at least the next 5 years. Right? So if you need to add anything within the next 5 years, that there's a predictable nature to the capex you need to spend. The other thing is making sure that your maintenance or your OpEx is predictable. Not hiking prices to give customers almost force them into a refresh cycle, which a lot of vendors do. And we cap our maintenance increases by 3%. So nothing above 3% increase per year. So if a customer buys now, in 10 years from now, it's only a 20% increase, right? So the maintenance doesn't drastically increase after 5 years. And the maintenance is also a percentage of the price they pay. So it's not a list price type of maintenance model. If the customer gets a discounted price today, they get automatically discounted on the maintenance as well. It's not a separate SKU. Okay, and we can talk a bit more about that offline. The architecture, which we'll go into now, forklift upgrades, guesswork, all of that stuff is really difficult. If you go sit with a customer today and say, where do you think you're going to be in 5 years? You're going to hear 7 different answers from 10 different people, right? No one knows where a company is going to be in 5 years from now, especially not the IT department. The CIO or CEO probably knows, oh, I might want to acquire, so I might double my capacity. I don't know what I'm going to do. But the IT staff typically don't know what the business is going to need. And then couple that with product obsolescence, not taking a product, putting it down in a customer's environment, and then 3 years later, having to walk into them and say to them, sorry, this box is end of life. How many of you have had to do that? Right? And it's not a nice place to be. So not obsoleting products is something that's very important. And then the last one is hidden costs. You know, there's no hidden cost with Exagrid. We include installation. We can talk a bit more about this offline. So where deduplication as a technology falls short is that it has to do a bunch of things before data can be written to disk, and it has to do a bunch of things before data can be accessed by the backup application. All of that is directly coupled to the performance of CPU. Now CPU, or compute within that appliance, is determined by the model, right? It can be a small model, it can be a big model, it can be a medium model. But at the end of the day, it is slow for backup ingest because of the stuff it's got to do, and it is slow for restore because of the stuff it's got to do to get the data back. That's the important thing. And then as that data grows, you only add disk behind those machines, and it doesn't matter what machine it is. We're not yet to talk about, we're talking about technology. You just add disk behind it. When that compute is already only certified to do a certain amount of compute per second, just adding disk behind it means you're ultimately growing the backup window on the customer side. They have to process more data because you're storing more data. So a backup window that started at 8 hours is now 12 hours or 15 hours. And that's something that we try to avoid with our architecture. So we have what is called, we spoke about it, as you saw the picture a little bit earlier, there's 2 worlds in one. The landing zone is what we use to ingest data, being able to back up as fast as disk. There's no process or processing that happens between the backup process and the data that lands on the Exagrid lines. That process or deduplication process is then something that happens in parallel to that, right? So it's not a post process, it runs in parallel with that, but it gives priority to the backup application. That gives you really fast backups, so meeting the backup window. That's a clear message that you can give, is meeting the backup window is the most important thing with the landing zone. But then storing that most recent copy in unduplicated format doesn't take away from the value proposition of instant restore, sure backup, data labs, etc., etc. All of those technologies that were spoken about earlier, they need to utilize these backup images to be able to provide value of the backup data to the customer. It's not only about having the backup in case, it is audit purposes, so you need to do sure backup, make sure that your backup is working, 0 errors, right? Test your backups regularly. The second thing, being able to access that data should you need to. Operationally, if you want to do test or patch management, etc., etc. All of that works with the Exagrid landing zone. We don't break any of that. It carries on as if you were using regular disk, okay? And then the other thing is if the customer needs to do things such as tape copy. We do have customers in South Africa that still do tape copy, especially in certain sectors where they have to. It's just sort of an audit requirement for them. So being able to do tape out really quickly is very important. And then the last, and then couple that with a scale out architecture. Now scale out architecture is not something new, but we take very careful consideration of how we architect and size our appliances that can be scaled out and stacked next to each other. In that scale out architecture, we add a full server. with the capacity necessary for it, the networking, the memory, the CPU, etc., that is purpose for that sized application, right? For that sized appliance. And then you scale out, giving predictability, because every single one of our appliances are architected to do a full backup in under 6 hours. So if the infrastructure can give it, we will ingest it at that speed. But the primary behind this is predictability. So when your customer today starts with 10 terabytes and adds 30 terabytes next year, that he knows he's not going to miss his backup window just because of a hardware appliance that's sort of throttling the infrastructure. The retention repository is something that we use for cost efficiency, but also what we use for protection of data. The retention repository is where we keep all data. The landing zone is where we ingest and we provide access to the backup application, and the repository is where some magic starts happening. And that's where we provide immutability. The immutability and protection against deletes, whether they are intentional or whether they are accidental. So providing protection against those deletes or delete functions that happen in certain events. It's important to note that we don't do archive storage, right? We're not going to go and provide an archive platform for a customer. Archive or retention lock of data is fantastic to protect against deletes. It is really good to protect against deletes, but once you have set an archive or retention lock on something, you will never be able to delete it until the timer has run out. Right? So you cannot, if you've set it for 10 years or 5 years or whatever, you cannot touch that data again. The thing is though, in backups, your backup data is not stagnant. You're adding applications, you're removing applications. You might be deleting data for specific reasons. So if you've retention locked something, you can never touch that data again. It is there forever. Now, or for as long as that hourglass is still busy running out before you can touch or tamper with it again. With Exagrid, all we've done is we've taken retention lock and turned it on its head. And we've added a timer to it automatically. So we protect all the data within the repository, in the retention repository, and all that data is retention locked. There's not one backup job that is not retention locked. They are all retention locked. But the retention lock has a timer on it. So it doesn't interfere with daily backup operations. I've so many times seen customers will go in and an application has been retired. When I was a backup application is retired, you go and delete the backup data. I don't need the backup data. I maybe need one image. I need to keep one image just before the application was retired. But if I've got 17 other images, that's just using capacity for no reason. I don't need it anymore. So delete is a normal operation that happens in backup all the time. The problem though is, what happens when it's not intentional? What happens when you're not expecting it to happen? So most of you will be aware, I hope, that a ransomware event is usually driven first by backup data being deleted. That's the first thing they go after. They compromise the backup application. They get elevated privileges on the backup application. So now they have elevated privileges on the backup application. They know that they can target all the backup repositories. Wherever the data is lying, they will try and target and delete it. If in that event something happens, we can talk a bit more about this. I'm glad that you guys have added some monitoring in there. But if you've elevated privileges on a backup application, a lot of the times customers don't go and check configuration of a backup job. All they make sure is, did the backup go through? Was it a green or a red? If the backup went through, the backup admin doesn't go and check again. He just checks his reports. He says, oh, my backup went through. But do you know whether the retention lock flag is still there? Do you know whether that data is now manipulable and deletable? Do you know whether they've changed the backup job to not actually back up the data you wanted to back up? Have they just disabled functions within the backup job? These are real events I'm talking about here. It's not something that's fictitious. They will change backup configuration and make you think your backups are happening. As an example, a SQL server, they'll just leave the C drive. Just let the C drive back up, but they won't back up the database actually. Right? That's a typical example. Now, in the event of something like that, and then they go and they issue these deletes. They say everything must now be deleted. So for 2 weeks you were exposed, they then go and delete all your backup data. With an Exagrid appliance, it will look like everything has been deleted. Geez, that color's off, man. Should have maybe tested that before. There's our 2 tiers here. This is our landing zone, and this is our repository. In the event that something tells us to delete it, we will go and delete it. In the landing zone, it will be gone. The cache will be cleared. But the data remaining behind in the repository will not be touched for that policy period, which by default on our appliances is 10 days. So within 10 days, the customer is protected to know that the data they need, they can get back again. In that event, they find out, okay, I've been attacked, we will also start sending out alerts. We will say, something's not right. You're busy deleting too much data. Something's going on, go have a look. We won't stop the deletes from happening because you don't want a false positive to happen. So we won't stop the deletes from happening, but we will alert. At that alert time, the customer logs into the Exagrid UI and pushes a little panic button that freezes the system. We don't process anything. No backups, restores, nothing from 10 days ago. So if the policy is 10 days, we don't even process the delete request from 10 days ago anymore. We stop processing everything. At that point now, the data is there, it's recoverable. You know it's recoverable. You did your sure backup, you did all the testing. You know your data is recoverable. And then you go and fix things, because they break a lot of things. If you've spoken to anybody that's been in a ransomware event, they will physically break hypervisors, they will physically disable things. They become malicious, right? They're really malicious in that space. So you have to now go and fix, close holes, probably reinstall firewalls because they've left stuff open all over the place. And then when you're ready, we re-expose these objects back to Veeam. And in that repository, it's as quick as right-clicking, rescanning the repository, all those restore points come back, are visible again to Veeam, and you recover your data back to your primary storage again. Okay, I was going to show a demo, but it's a little bit slow. You know what? It's not working that well. If something had to try and encrypt the data, our storage is immutable. The data in the repository cannot be updated, modified, or changed in any way. And we're treated as a completely new image, correct? Because B2 is now a different file. It doesn't look the same anymore. At a byte level, we know the differences between B1, B2, and now B3. Basically, B2 becomes B3. So there's no issue there, you can recover again. 5 simple steps to recovery. Invoke recover mode. Right? You log on to our UI, the customer clicks the panic button. They then contact us and say, please help us. And we know how to start walking them through this recovery process as well, because it's not something they're going to do every day. We have got written processes if the customer wants to add it into their DR testing, for instance, if they do DR testing, if they want to simulate a ransomware event. This is something that's happening now. Customers are simulating ransomware events. What is the recovery process going to be? And we have documented procedures now that can put that into their DR testing. Determine the time of the event, determine which backup completed. If it happened in the middle of a backup, we would not have been able to deduplicate all the data, so you've got to find out what was deduplicated, what wasn't. But you know what the time of the event is. You do a point-in-time recovery of our machine. So it's almost like a snapshot. Think of it as a snapshot. You point-in-time recover the repository to just before the delete happened. And then you bring that data back into the backup application and you recover. Customers require DR. Replicated data is important. 3, 2, 1, right? 1 copy off-site. So having a secondary copy off-site, this can be achieved using Exagrid replication. It can still be achieved using Veeam replication. If you wanted to use a copy job, or if you wanted to do anything else, or maybe curate a second tier, that's fine. From a Veeam point of view, and this is where Mark stole my thunder, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but the integration between us and Veeam is important to understand, because the data mover process is a proprietary protocol. So it doesn't expose the Exagrid data on the network at all. So when a attacker is scanning and trying to look for any data paths such as CIF shares or C drives or D drives, he's not going to find that within Exagrid because there is no exposed data on the network at all. The data mover is a point-to-point protocol as well. So the data flow will always be from the backup proxy directly to the Exagrid appliance. There's no backup server involved in that transmit process. It's almost a lightweight proxy, if you want to think of it like that. So the Exagrid acts as a lightweight proxy. That's important because things like synthetic fulls and processing of synthetic fulls happen on the Exagrid landing zone. This does not happen traversing the network. The data mover does the processing of those synthetic fulls on the Exagrid landing zone. We've recently added support for Microsoft Office 365. So the integration here is actually protecting the VBO. So for customers that have VBO on-premise, it's also susceptible to attack, right? It's a Windows machine. If the customer needs to protect that, it's a good idea to back up that data. What we then say is keep long-term retention on us. So keep more data on us, keep your VBO policy to maybe 60 days or 30 days, and then protect that machine and keep the long-term retention on the Exagrid, so you get two benefits: less storage utilization and protection against ransomware events. And then fully scale out repository compliance. So scale out repository, seamless scalability. You add in a machine, you can add it to the scale out repository, and Veeam will just balance the data across us based on capacity. And all of that happens at the customers. We've done it within a week. Veeam has sort of figured out where the data needs to go, and it balances out that scale out repository quite quickly. Security is important, right? Being able to harden the operating system. Customers that require immutable data would have to build a Linux server with an XFS file system, and now have to have Linux skills to be able to have a Linux hardened repository. That's great technology, but it adds technical responsibility onto the customer. If the customer is not comfortable running Linux, securing Linux, and all of that stuff, we can replace that infrastructure. So we become that repository, we harden it, we secure it, it is purpose built, and it's treated as a platform and supported fully by Exagrid to the end user. Okay, so there's no 3, 4, 5 parties to involve there. Our maintenance and support is also something unique, and we've done this for 16 years already. We do all installations remotely. We ship the product out to the end user or to the partner. They rack and stack the systems. We come in over a WebEx session and configure the system with the customer. And in that configuration process, do training, handover, and that same support engineer that did that installation will be the customer's support engineer for the foreseeable future. So during normal 8 to 5 business hours, that level 2 support engineer is assigned to that customer. So there's no having to go through third-party call centers that are then routed through to somebody in another part of the world. None of that happens. You contact us, it's direct in-theater support from Exagrid to the end user. There's no license fees to track or renew with us, where everything is enabled on the system automatically. The customer buys the hardware and the software features are all enabled for that end user. There's point and full releases, and this is important. A lot of the times for you to go to a new release of software with our competitors, you have to buy the new shiny hardware. You don't get the upgrade facility between major releases unless you buy the new hardware. We've got customers in South Africa with 7-year-old appliances that are running our latest software with all the features that I spoke about earlier. Okay, and then that's it. Just to recap over there, there's a couple of things that we've also released. I wanted to show the demo. I don't know if there will be enough time. I don't want to carry on for too much longer. But the latest release of our software is hardened even more. So we have added role-based access control. We've added the ability to do IPsec tunnels for replication. We've added the ability to do reporting. So reporting. Everybody wants reporting. So the data that we used to have in the machine is now exposed to the customer. So being able to do capacity planning, etc., etc. All of that is now within the system. And towards next year, sometime we're going to be able to support Microsoft Azure as a DR target. So for customers that want to be able to replicate from on-premise to the cloud for DR, Microsoft Azure will be supported, and Amazon Web Services is already supported. So we already support replicating from on-prem to Amazon, and Microsoft will be coming